Wow, what a wonderful turnout. Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you from our Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies. It is a great pleasure to have you all here for our special evening. My name is Tunç Şen. I'm an assistant professor in the history department and also a member of the Sakıp Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies Executive Committee. On behalf of our center's director, Professor Holger Klein, who is unfortunately out of town this week, I would like to welcome you all. Tonight's program celebrates the extraordinary legacy and continued relevance of James Baldwin on the centennial of his birth, which was technically last year, but we still can celebrate the centennial of his birth. As we will discover today, Baldwin found refuge and inspiration in Istanbul during some of the most formative years of his writing life. The Turkish-American filmmaker and photographer Sedat Pakay's captivating photography and filmography further document this little explored dimension of Baldwin's creative universe. Tonight we gather to explore how Istanbul became, in many ways, another place for Baldwin, and how Sedat Pakay's images illuminate Baldwin's profound engagement with this city. We will first watch Sedat Pakay's short movie, James Baldwin from Another Place, along with its outtakes. Then we will engage in a conversation with three distinguished guests, Maureen freely, Boggs, and Timur Pakay. Let me briefly introduce you our guests today. Maureen freely is well known as the translator of the Turkish Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk, but she also has published 8 novels and brought into English several Turkish literary classics and works by Turkey's rising stars. For many years, she worked as a journalist in London, writing about literature, social justice, and human rights. As chair of the Translators Association, and more recently as president and chair of English Pen, Maureen has campaigned for writers and freedom of expression internationally. Maureen also teaches at the University of Warwick. We welcome you, Maureen. We also welcome Boggs, who is the author of the forthcoming biography, Baldwin, A Love Story, which will be published this August by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. Nick also rediscovered and co-edited a new edition of Baldwin's collaboration with French artist Yoran Kazak, titled Little Man, A Story of Childhood, which came out in 2018. This academic year, Nicholas is the John Hopp Franklin Fellow at the National Humanities Center. And this is information I recently got from Nick. He is also an alumni of Columbia University. He did his PhD here at the University of English Literature Department. We welcome you, Nick, for and finally, we welcome Timur Pakay, the son of the late Sedat Pakay. Timur is a member of the Columbia community. He is currently the director of the SHARP program, an extensive professional development program for public health researchers at the Mailman School of Public Health. But Timur collaborated with his father while he was shooting his movies and the photographs. Timur has also spoken at events with his mother, Kaiti Pakay, about his father's work and about his portfolio. Timur also collaborated on articles regarding his father's life and artistic products. So we are so lucky to have you, Timur, today with us. Before I leave the floor, I'd like to express our gratitude to the Sakıp Sabancı family for their invaluable support in promoting Ottoman and Turkish studies events here in New York and beyond. I also want to thank the Department of Art History and Archaeology, specifically the Department Chair Professor Sedat Pakay, for co-sponsoring this event. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Sümeyye Yar, our center's Associate Director, who single-handedly took care of everything to make this event possible. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming out. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Turkish Studies. Can you hear me? We need a... Oh, that's not a microphone. Okay. It's such a pleasure to be here, especially with Timur and Maureen, really. I had the pleasure of meeting Sedat a couple times, but these two knew him very well, so I will turn things over to them in just a second. We have a lot of people here who know a lot about James Baldwin, so I won't speak for too long, but I just want to very quickly explain how it is that he ended up in Turkey. And then we'll talk about, three of us, what kept him coming back, the deep friendships with folks like Sedat, and of course, how this beautiful film came to be. I spent a lot of time in the archives at the Schomburg, the Beinecke, and elsewhere, and so I can actually say that from 1961 to 1970, out of 160 months, Baldwin spent 41 months in Istanbul. So think about that. This is the 60s when so much was going on in the States. And in fact, much of that time when he wasn't in Istanbul, he was still in Paris and London. And we can talk about why. But I just wanted that number to kind of sink in, because I didn't even realize until I sort of looked at the archives just how extensive that time was. So Baldwin met Engin Cizar in 1957 in New York City, casting him to play the role of Giovanni in an actor's studio workshop staged reading of the play from the novel Giovanni's Room. And Engin had come to the States to study at Yale Drama School. Baldwin had recently returned from his first trip to the American South, which began to transform him politically and as a writer. But what persisted was his need to get away from the States, or away from New York in particular. Impossible, as he said in the video, as he had done in Paris. So Baldwin and Engin became fast friends, and very soon, from one of Baldwin's writing refuges, the MacDowell Artist Residency, he wrote to him of his desire to someday, quote, build a house, quote, by the side of the mountain or the edge of the sea, where he could find some peace and sanctuary. So it was just a few years later, in November 1961, that Baldwin arrived in such a place, Istanbul, for the first time. He came from Israel. And he actually walked right into a wedding party at Engin, where Engin had just married the actress Gulruz Saruri. There's a good story about that we'll come back to. But Baldwin was exhausted and frustrated with the progress on another country, but he was embraced by Engin and his friends, and he was able to make incredible progress on the novel in a short time. He finished writing it at a kitchen table at a Robert College party, famously. More on the college when these parties to come. And in the years ahead, Baldwin returned to write The Fire Next Time, which landed him on the cover of Time magazine in 1963. He also came back to work on his Broadway play, Who's Mr. Charlie, the next year, 1964. And it was also that year, 1964, that he first met Sedat Pakay.
Thank you, Nick. First off, just wanted to thank the Sabancı Center for Turkish Studies for organizing this tremendous event. My dad would be very honored, and I'm very happy that we could be here to celebrate his work and the work of James Baldwin. So I was just going to talk briefly about my dad and just give a little bit of background of his life up to the period of recording this or shooting the film. So he was born in Istanbul in 1945. He grew up in an area of Istanbul called Fatih, which is more middle-class conservative neighborhood on the European side, sort of sprinkled with Ottoman and Byzantine history, surrounded by the Byzantine Wall. And he attended Robert College. At the time, it was Robert Academy. He started there as an 11-year-old, and he boarded for until the age of 20, I believe. So he went there for middle school and high school. He learned English. For those of you that are not familiar with Robert College, it was one of the first American schools outside the US. And it has a lot of importance in Istanbul and Turkey today. I imagine there's some Robert College alumni in the audience tonight. My dad was very proud of his Robert College, his time at Robert College. There he learned a lot about photography, literature. He was very interested in shooting photos of students and faculty. He was part of the yearbook committee. And then he graduated from high school and went into Robert College, the university. There he entered the engineering school. And during his second year, he actually had your father as a professor, Professor John Fearley, in engineering. And one of the great stories my dad shared with me was her father came to his dorm room and announced to my dad and his roommate at the time that, oh, you guys did very well on the engineering exam. You got a 100 on the exam. And he looked at my dad and said, you got a 5, and looked at his roommate and said, you got a 95. At that point, he decided maybe engineering is not for me. And he switched over to humanities at Robert College. He stayed there for 2 years, and until 1966, so he was 20. And one of his teachers, Sedat Pakay, who had taught at Robert College and had attended Yale Art School in graphic design, really persuaded him or encouraged him to apply to Yale. And therefore he did, and he eventually got into Yale, and he went there in 1966. He studied with the great Walker Evans, who's a prolific photographer. He was art director for 20 years at Fortune magazine and Time Life. He's very well known for documenting the Great Depression and the living conditions in the deep South. And so my dad was really excited and enthusiastic about working with Walker. And so he, during Robert College, he learned about the US through his teachers. Many of his teachers were American. So, and he developed his friendship with Baldwin. As Nick said, they had met in 1964 at a cocktail party hosted by Engin Cezar and Güliz Sururi. And he learned a lot about America through the lens of Baldwin. Up until that point, my dad had never read any of Baldwin's works, hadn't really known a lot about what was going on with regards to civil rights in the US. So he he took it all in by getting to know Baldwin. And so I think it sort of prepped him for his new life, new adventure in New Haven at Yale. So he'd studied at Yale with Walker Evans, and he got into Yale because of his photographic work. And part of his master's thesis was to photograph the great artists of the time. He had photographed Andy Warhol, he photographed Rothko, Sol Steinberg as well. And so he really was kind of immersed in a very vibrant artist community in New York and around Yale. So during that time, so when he graduated in 1968, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. He finished Yale and he moved to New York, and he actually went to go visit Baldwin, who was in Los Angeles at the time, the summer of '68. And Baldwin was working on the script for the film about Malcolm X. And I'm going to save that story till later. But after living in LA, he worked for Compton Advertising, which eventually became part of Saatchi & Saatchi. My dad, producer and of various commercials. He had won a Clio Award for a commercial he'd done for Spanish Tide. And so in 1970, he had to go back to Turkey because his visa had expired. And at that time, Baldwin was living in Turkey, and so they decided to do the film. And so it was that summer of 1970 that you saw the shots of Istanbul. And in various interviews, my dad had said, he was always interested in meeting Baldwin. When he heard Baldwin was in Turkey as a high school student, he was really fascinated by his face. And he had said the topography of his face and his infectious smile. And he really wanted to get that on camera. He saw, a lot of pain and struggle and love in Baldwin's face, and really wanted to document that through film and through his photography. We're going to go through some of his photographs in a bit, and we can kind of talk through some of those. But so he shot in 1970, and he went back to the US in 71, and he continued working at Compton Advertising. And Compton Advertising gave him an editing room to finish up the Baldwin film, which he finalized in 1973. And in 1973, that was kind of a major milestone for my dad. He showed the film. The film premiere was at Cinema One at 59th Street in Lexington. My dad was living in that part of town, and that's where he met my mother, who's here with us tonight. And the rest is history. But I know I've been talking a bit, but
No, that's great, and we're going to get to the film. I want to back up for just a second and go back to kind of the milieu of the 60s when Baldwin came over. Maureen was a kid then and had an incredible view of these parties and this community of, wouldn't call them expats, but why don't you explain it to us?
So I think for the first 100 years of Robert College, the teachers were pretty pious, straight-laced. Their were, to improve their young men mostly. By the time we got there was a new breed. After World War II, there were people, the professors who were at Robert College at the time we arrived are people who were leaving the US on purpose because they were trying to escape homophobia, traditional marriage, witch hunts against the left, and no fun. Yeah. So they had a very, very different idea of how LA should be. And one of the things that really came across in the film is that sense that they were just in a new place where they had to make it up as they went along. Yeah, and so they're very critical of U.S. Foreign policy, and in Istanbul in the 60s, we had a front seat view of what it was like to be under the American imperial thumb. It was a little bit difficult because we were also American, but also very much believing in a progressive American education. Yeah. And also, most of the people who actually maybe all of us who came knew nothing about Turkey, knew nothing about its politics. We're absolutely enthralled to be in this gorgeous city that was in ruins and all the more beautiful for it. Yeah, and there was a lot of staring. Okay, and they were because we had these fortunate we had these links with the art world and the writing world downtown, as they called it. My father and his friends would go downtown a lot to the Çiçek Passage to drink, to Kulis, where there were journalistic intrigues. Who'd also been to Robert College. But when they came up to the hill to meet the hill people, the wildest parties were at my parents' house, and I may be the only one who remembers the parties because I was sober.
12 years old.
Yeah, well. And so, Timur, I remember your father started doing these Saturday walks with my father, and that's where one of my father's books shows all these extraordinary photographs that Sedat was taking when he was still a teenager. And so he was invited to a party at our house. It must have been 1964, and I was given the job of looking after him because he said he might be shocked. And I think he was. Okay. But that was, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if Jimmy was at that same party, because he came to all of our parties with always bringing a lot of friends. So anyway, that's, if you want to know more about the other things I remember about those parties, we can talk later in a corner.
A lot of homemade vodka in Istanbul during this period.
Okay, so we have in the audience, the daughter of the expert on the Hill cocktail. Yeah. And when we did a launch for my book of my photos, it came out after he died. We decided to have it, the Hill cocktail. It was really, really hard to get the recipe, but your mother had the recipe. But she had these, it was lethal. It was lethal.
I made it.
Do you remember what it is? It was one part. Oh, you made
I
it.
actually made it, yes.
Yeah, you made the vodka while the party was going on, yeah? with Sophie Spirit.
Well, Maureen won't tell the story, but I will.
Okay.
This did not involve Baldwin, apparently. But when she was this young, she would wake up in the morning from these parties and come out, and everybody would just be blanketing around, and she'd be coming around her sister, water, and offering water to people. But let's I'm not really the moderator, but somehow I'm moderating. But I'd like to know, so Pakay was a teenager at that point. So how did their friendship develop over time that eventually, and then we can talk about this trip to Hollywood, which was a really important moment and a sort of discouraging moment for Baldwin when he was working on the Malcolm X script. But can you give us just a little bit of sense of how their friendship developed between like 64 and 68, 69 when the Hollywood stuff happened?
Yeah, I mean, Baldwin was coming and going between New York and Istanbul. I know that, over time, you've obviously photographed Baldwin around the European side of Istanbul. I know that, their friendship developed, and when my father was applying to Yale, Baldwin had promised to be his sponsor, or ended up being his sponsor for international visa. And I know that, I think their friendship developed or kind of went second level after he had been at Yale. I think he used to actually go visit Baldwin while he was at Yale during holidays, and he had met many of Baldwin's family members in New York. And then, I think they remained friends into the early 70s, and then they kind of drifted apart.
So when he came out to Hollywood in 1968, Baldwin was there to write the screenplay for Malcolm X, and in fact, parts of it ended up in Spike Lee's film. But this was Hollywood at that period, and it was a really horrible experience. I mean, he wanted Billy D. Williams to play Malcolm X. They wanted Charlton Heston in blackface to play. So this is what Baldwin was contending with, right? Trying to get this film made. And I believe that Sedat came out at a really challenging moment. It was also after the murder of King. And so Baldwin ended up going back to Istanbul and directing this play. I won't pronounce it. Friends of the Fallen. It's John Herbert play, the Canadian. And it was, Magdalena Zaborowska has written about it in her book, and it's just an incredible occurrence that this play got made. It was really about homosexuality and prisons, and the fact that this was made in a very socially conservative country at the time was extraordinary, and in part was because Baldwin was so famous. But for Baldwin, it was such an incredible experience because after the frustration with American racism, with Blues for Mr. Charlie, which got booted off Broadway, and also especially with what had happened in Hollywood, to be able to come and direct this play and create with this community of Turkish actors, including Engin and others, he said it saved my life. That's what he said. And it also kind of transformed Turkish theater history.
Well, you say it's a socially conservative country, but the intelligentsia, the artists, were not a socially conservative. They were the opposite. They were on the left, getting farther and farther as the 60s went on, and they paid for it. So So, and it was very difficult for that, as you know, for that play to be staged. And so all the people who were involved in it were willing to take the challenge. So, yeah, I just
And
wanted
Don
to
Cherry did the music. Don Cherry had happened to be passing through Istanbul, and Engin saw him and didn't know who he was. And Baldwin said, "We got to hang out with this guy, invite him back to the house." And he said, "Well, why?" I said, "This is Don Cherry, you know." So he actually ended up doing music with Outtakes. Right. Should we look? Should we look a little at these photographs?
Sure.
Maybe I can comment on the first few. So to the right is my father at age 25, and Mrs. Baldwin in the center, and in between the two is my father's brother-in-law at the time. And I was going to say they're at the Grand Bazaar, but I don't think that's right. Maureen, do you recognize this?
No, it's outside, isn't it? But I'm saying that you can get pictures really fast.
Yes. If you've never been to Istanbul or to Turkey, they're very good at taking your photos for ID cards or driver's
You
license.
just can't go 2 feet without your ID card. Yeah.
So my dad also just, he had already lived he studied at Yale. He kind of lived through the late 60s in America, so he was kind of sporting like a hippie look right here. And this is my father with Baldwin. I was going to say, I always thought this was Fatih, but this does not look like Fatih. I'm wondering if this is Nishan Hush or...
Across from the German consulate?
Maybe? Somebody in this room will know where it was taken.
Yes, I can ask the audience. This is Baldwin with Gülriz Sururi, who's a very well-known actress in Turkey, who's married to Engin Cezar. And through Engin and Gülriz, my father was able to meet Baldwin. But my dad was also connected to Baldwin through one of his teachers, David Leeming, who is a biographer of Baldwin. It was also Baldwin's assistant at the time. David
Leeming talking.
David Leeming was a recent Princeton graduate. I think he had his PhD in English.
He got one later.
We all did in those days, yeah.
And so my dad learned a lot about American literature and history through Leeming, and was also connected to Baldwin. This photo here, Baldwin is, he's actually on a ferry, and I don't know, Mom, if you know the make of this car, or Donald.
The Triumph Herald.
What is it?
The Triumph Herald.
Triumph Herald. They were on a ferry and they were going to Baldwin's summer house, which was in Kilyos. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kilyos is on the Black Sea coast, so northern Istanbul. And obviously surrounded by spectators. And
And all those wonderful bank signs that we used to have.
Yes. Maybe. Okay.
So this is Buford Delaney, who came over in quite a journey. David Leeming drove him through Yugoslavia in 1966, and this was probably Baldwin's some of the happiest time in his life. He called it the wonderful summer of 1966. Buford did some paintings. This is Bertice Redding, who's a singer, a Black American singer, jazz singer, blues singer, and she had a German husband, and she sang at hotels and other venues, and she became very close with Baldwin. These are her children. So, as Baldwin often did, he was incredibly close to his family in New York, but he also created these kinship structures in the south of France, in Paris, and very much in Istanbul. He needed these structures in order to kind of, he would write all day. He would sleep all day. Engin and Gülriz would come back from performing. They'd have dinner. He'd read to them parts of the novel. They'd go to bed, and he'd then stay up all night writing. And they would just repeat this cycle, ad infinitum. So
That's why he needed the parties.
That's why he did the parties, because that was his. He'd go from the parties to the writing, which is why you didn't see him in the morning when you came out for a while.
That's sweet. The white dog. That's his puppy. That's sweet.
Yes, Flea
No,
and,
that's Andromar.
and Drama Key, right?
You know the
And Drama Key.
It's called Andromar.
Sure. I think this is also in Helios. That's Bertice and Baldwin. This is stunning. It's the U.S. Navy naval guys.
Sixth Fleet.
The Sixth Fleet, and that's the blue mosque behind it, right? So there's a lot that's being captured in this photo. Well, imperialism, Baldwin, Istanbul.
And this gentleman recognized Baldwin, and he had a copy. He actually had a copy of one of Baldwin's books in his back pocket, and he got Baldwin to sign it on the spot.
Baldwin had his typewriter. Yeah.
Drinking tea.
One of the wonderful things about that film and these photos is how happy you see Baldwin in a lot of these. It was a real place of refuge and happiness for him. There he goes.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. I think this is one of Bertice's children. I'm not sure. Oh, go back to that for 1 second. Just wanted to say we got the so Little Man was this children's book that Baldwin wrote that I co-edited, and recently got the news there's going to be a Turkish edition. It's going to be translated into Turkish in the coming
And so, is there anybody who is going to be equal to the slang in Turkish?
Yeah, so it's written in what Baldwin called Black English. He has this incredible essay that he wrote in the New York Times called If Black English Isn't a Language, then Tell Me What Is. And so there was a French edition that recently came out. Raoul Peck wrote the introduction to that one, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm very curious to see how, what types of sort of vernacular languages are used, and what will be used in a Turkish context is really kind of fascinating one to think about with a speech. Is it called Gypsy Roma? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert, but it's an interesting question. Just looking sheep. Maureen, maybe as they're going through this, we've talked about this in the past, but can you kind of talk about the reaction to Baldwin? Baldwin wrote that incredible essay, A Stranger in the Village, about being in Switzerland and how it was to be looked upon by all the villagers who had never seen a person of color before. And of course, Istanbul's a slightly different situation, but you told me a bit about sort of a Turkish way of looking directly in people's eyes.
There was it doesn't happen as much now because the world has changed, but
Yeah.
there was, if you were all different, and I was too, you'd be surrounded by people who were just looking at you and a half. And it was not hostile, although, it was obviously the only thing that Jimmy could do about it was laugh. Yeah. So, but the other thing that is true of that part of the world, so definitely not just Turkey, is the tradition of looking into somebody's eyes, and then you decide whether they're going to be a friend for life or an enemy. You see their soul, I think, and there's that connection. And he made that connection, or people made that connection with him all the time.
And it seems like Sedat did. It seems like that's part of the photographic impulse with Sedat.
Yeah. I imagine that when Sedat was going around with the camera, they were also pretty curious about him.
Yeah.
And that he probably explained sometimes that this was Meshhood, this very distinguished writer, and they would have been interested in that as well. Did your father ever speak about that?
He did, yes, and it was just, it is part of the culture of kind of being stared at and followed, or if you're a celebrity, people kind of swarming around you. I think I wouldn't say that, Baldwin was a celebrity like, Turkish actors or musicians at the time. But he did talk, how Baldwin did attract a lot of attention on the street. He part of his friendship, going a little bit into the friendship, he brought Baldwin to his family's house for dinner, and kind of, Baldwin learned a lot about the Turkish culture, through kind of knowing my father a bit, as well as meeting people kind of in Engin and Guriz's network.
Like Ali Poyrazov. When researching this book, he's now in his 70s, but he was in the play. He's now a very famous actor in Turkey, though I did not really understand this. I was walking through Central Park 3 years ago, just talking with him. All these people are staring at us, and suddenly all these Turkish people are coming up to us and asking for selfies. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So I was getting stared at too, but not really. He was.
So, Nick, one of the things I kept thinking about when I was watching the film, which is the first time I've seen it, my mind kept going back to that famous interview that Jimmy had with Dick Cavett, okay, because that's always brought in. And he was so tense, he was under attack, and Dick Cavett was saying, well, can you explain this to me, this civil rights thing, or Justice Lenin? And I was just so struck by how relaxed his face was. And your father was capturing that. Obviously there was a lot of affection and trust, but it was clear that he felt he could just be himself, having surrounded himself, created a family around him that was protecting him. So
even as, and I'll read it, this is the letter that he wrote to his agent Bill Mills. This is something that he realized while he was in Istanbul. He said, I think I must reconcile myself to being a transatlantic commuter and turn to my advantage, and not impossibly the advantage of others, the fact that I am a stranger everywhere. So Baldwin used, even though he felt very welcome there, he was still an outsider. And he actually kind of thrived, and there was a great cost to him, but he also really thrived in these places where he felt like an outsider. It fueled his perspective, and it fueled his art. But I think in Istanbul, he felt particularly that he was a stranger, but also beloved. He didn't elsewhere.
Not in Switzerland, certainly.
No.
And as he touched upon in the film, privacy was very important to him. I think he could get that privacy here in Istanbul.
Nobody could reach him by phone.
When you said that, I thought you meant New York. Over there.
Yes, over there.
More sodas, perhaps? And then we can maybe open up to some questions.
So that is Bebek, isn't it?
That is Bebek, yes.
Yeah, that makes me cry.
That was his swimming instructor, according to David Lee.
Is the place we call that?
Were these the waffles? You have ice cream?
Jalfed.
Is it? Not
Jalfed.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is, I believe, the sour cherry juice cellar in Istanbul, which I haven't seen in a while in recent trips. But I think he was sort of, he really, my dad liked putting Baldwin, next to sort of these exotic Istanbul backdrops, whether it be, Roma, gypsy kids kind of playing around in the streets, or, corn sellers or sour cherry juice sellers, outdoors. And
I would just reframe that a little bit. These were not exotic scenes for us. This is the city we lived in. That's the way it was, and particularly living in Fatih, this was his world. So he was putting Jimmy into his world in a very beautiful way. Yeah.
Andrew Mosque, yes.
back at the island.
Yeah.
Baldwin returned to Istanbul for the last time in 1980 to visit Engin, and he talked about it as kind of one of his last great, happy, calm moments. And it continued to have that impact on the Mediterranean air. So here he is directing Engin in Fortune in Men's Eyes, and Baldwin, so wonderful to see what's happened with his films, because it was such a dream of his to have to direct films and direct plays, and by all accounts, he was an absolutely incredible director.
Oh, for the cigarettes. Yeah.
That's Engin, Ulrich, and Baldwin. That's Billy D. Williams. This is in Hollywood when he was trying to have him play Malcolm X, which didn't happen.
I've seen playing solitaire.
Yeah.
And I actually don't know, Trevor, do you know who these people are?
That's his brother's David.
Right, that's right. On the far, on the right, he's holding his hand. Who else?
I can't think it's first name. Ainsworth.
Oh.
But this looks like it must have been Turkey, right? The
It
table?
looks like rockets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, your Buford visited him, Alex Haley came through, Marlon Brando visited, but then had to leave, because he was being chased by the media, even then.
He was getting the stare, was he?
I think he was getting more than the stare. He wrote Baldwin a letter, like, sorry, I gotta run, was there for like a few days. I don't know who the other folks are though. Like, who's between Baldwin and his brother?
I'm not sure, but I like the mystery man.
Yeah, we're gonna find out.
He's
We're
half.
gonna find out. Kenton Keith was a cultural attaché, African American who he was close to,
Okay.
so it might be one of those. And then that's the last one.
I think that's the last.
And the last thing I want to say, which I think has to be said, watching that incredible video, is, this was 1970. This was sort of a turning point in how Baldwin was thinking about privacy and about writing about his life. I mean, his later essays in the 70s and 80s, he would write about his experiences in Greenwich Village and elsewhere coming into his sexual identity. But that's obviously like a very complicated. It's almost like Sedat, and somehow Sedat was able to do this, got him to have a kind of self-reflective therapy session on, in the movie. It was really just to mark, it was very unusual for Baldwin at that particular point. And there was a switch that happened there. But I'm not sure how your father was able to do that. But it's remarkable to have that.
Yeah, I think it's because he was interested in him as a person,
Right.
and not as a political figure or the person who was supposed to deliver the message to idiotic white people who didn't understand anything. So I think I think that might have been a relief, and also there was the age difference, and he could indulge somebody who looked like a little bit like a hippie in those days, just asking a genuinely concerned, interested question. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, throughout my dad's career, he was always brave enough to ask the tough questions. In some of his later work, there was a time where he was doing a promotional film for PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, and Joaquin Phoenix was in the room, and he was, it was sweltering hot. It was in a Soho loft, and Joaquin was going to be reading off a teleprompter, and something didn't look right, and he, my dad basically, was asking him to sit in a certain position, straighten his shirt, give him a deep, big smile. He was able to push people, in front of the camera. He was able to ask the really, most, how should I say, the toughest questions to Baldwin. And I think, he developed this personality of not being afraid when interviewing his subjects. But,
In a gentle voice.
With a very gentle voice.
Yeah.
He was very polite, and shockingly, he grew up in a, as I said, a more conservative family, and he was very shy during his childhood. So
he was very shy when I first met him, especially when my father and Smith were doing the goat dance and the library floor fell through. Yeah, that was that part. Yeah. But he was always very, very. He never lost his dignity. He was shocked. You could only see that from his eyes. Otherwise, after this, the floor was still there.
Yes. Before we turn it over to questions, I would just say, there's of course an exhibit at the Brooklyn Public Library that's happening right now. But also these outtakes at Yale, we didn't see all of them. There's more. You actually didn't see one of my favorite parts of it is Baldwin inside the house being brought a hard-boiled egg. And there's just like 5 minutes of Baldwin eating a hard-boiled egg, and it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful human moment, and there's lots like that. So that Sedat really, the fact that he's captured all of these incredible photographs and videos is we're all just so grateful to you and to Kathy for preserving Sedat's photographs. Just want to say that.
So, yes, you have a question.
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of asking,
You want to raise your voice a
Okay.
little bit? Yeah.
so thank you so much for this panel. I think it's very timely given the situation we're living in with the rise of white supremacism here in the United States and homophobia and transphobia. This morning we woke up to the news that Trump is now threatening to deport students on visas who are speaking out for Palestine. As a Turkish student here, I think I wrestle with the question, what does it mean to leave and what does it mean to stay, and how do you fight back from those different places? My question with Baldwin, I guess what I wonder about Baldwin is he was one of the people who had the privilege to leave. And how did he wrestle with that privilege when many others in the civil rights movement, Black people in the civil rights movement in this country, did not have the privilege to seek refuge in a place like Istanbul, did not have the networks that he had access to, and the class sort of privilege also associated with cultural capital that he had. So how did he wrestle with that privilege?
May I say something? I think that he was first and foremost a writer, a witness, as you said in this film, and he had to get away. He was and as he said in the film and as he said in his writing, he could understand his country better from a distance. And actually, if you look at that generation after World War II in the 50s and the 60s, if you added all of the people who were able to leave or had to leave because they would have ended up in prison because they were gay or whatever, you see those people, they go away and then they come back. It's always going back. And I think he was far more had far more to give whenever he returned because he'd been away. It's not a privilege. Obviously some people can't leave, but in many ways he was hounded out.
Yeah, he was being followed by the FBI. He was being surveyed. Remember those 41 months out of 100 and whatever. Well, the rest of the time he was there. He was back for the March on Washington. He was back lecturing for CORE. He was back, for Montgomery. So this was his strategy. This is how he was able to do the incredible work he did, both on the ground politically, but also writing the essays like The Fire Next Time that had such a massive impact, on history.
Can I also add, as a student now, this is you're asking about him, but we're looking at the quandary we're in right now, yeah. And if you can think about leaving is not final and absolute. You just go away if you can. You come back when you must, and so it's. I'm speaking as somebody who was born in Neptune, New Jersey. I grew up in Istanbul, but I come back and I come back and I come back, and I take the inspiration from Shirley. First of all, most of all, that it's always my country, and I will witness it better if I come and go.
And he was helping people too. I mean, he money to Eldridge Cleaver. I mean, he who hadn't been so nice to him. I mean, he was also helping a lot of. He was almost solely responsible for getting Tony Maynard out of prison for helping Stokely Carmichael. So he was super engaged in the civil rights and revolutionary struggles, even when he was spending some time abroad and then from the south of France as well.
But also, I feel for you and other students now. I really do, and we all do. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. But I think you are not alone.
You're not alone. And another way of thinking about it is, you don't have to leave. You don't necessarily have to leave to leave and take a break, right? Get to sort of go tend your garden or whatever it is to kind of recompose oneself in order to engage in struggles. Thanks for your question.
Another. Yeah.
I'm just curious about, is there any writing or dialogue of Baldwin or your father to talk about the homosexual scene in Istanbul in the 60s? He was there, did he engaged in Baldwin? And what was the scene there?
Nothing in writing, but I don't know.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, there was the Robert College scene was a multinational, multi-sexual place, and I think that's part of what made Baldwin feel comfortable. Hillary Sumner Boyd.
So Hillary Sumner Boyd was not alone. I mean, in the community I grew up in, there were more people who were gay than not gay. In fact, that's what I grew up with. So I think it's mainly that everybody was accepted no matter what they did in their bedrooms, basically, and there was that understanding, and so there wasn't a need to just be in a gay scene because everybody understood, and there were a lot of part-timers.
Her father called them odd men out, and they could be odd men out, for any number of reasons, right? That might have to do with sexuality, that might have to do with their politics, might have to do with, there's some of these British guys who came from these really rich families and
escaping families.
So it was sort of a safe place.
Yeah, until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Because this is just happening. The film is happening just before the first, the 1971 coup, and that is continued with the 1980 coup, and so it's very much not safe.
Yeah.
Although that world and that life continued, and there was always in those sets the importance of privacy to stay alive, and the importance of privacy for people coming in and out of prison, political prisons. So that was the family that he created around himself, and that we all created around himself. And so many people from that family are in the room, which makes me happy. Hello, nice to see you again. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question. I don't know if you guys have that much info on it, and feel free to just lead me to other sources, but I was thinking about more specifically the kind of neighborhoods in Istanbul that would have really inspired Baldwin, or would have been kind of like where people were hanging out, maybe like different coffee shops and things like that. I know you mentioned Pasajı, and I was also thinking of I think when I looked up Engin's Tiyatro Grubu, I think they were based in Şişli, but I don't know, I wonder if you know where they were usually based. Were they always based there? I couldn't find the location of that on the map. That's just my personal thing. I want to figure out where that was. But
the neighborhoods, Şişli, that's where the theaters were. Some of the theaters were. Beyoğlu, where it was, where the old European city, sometimes called Pera in the old days. That was the center of social life. Yeah. you had some photographs of Bebek, which was near
several
Timur
homes in
College.
Bebek.
Yeah.
And then there's
Yeah.
Pasha's Library.
And the
He
Pasha's
lived in
Library.
Pasha's Library.
The Pasha's Library is one of the most beautiful houses in the world, and I can't ever live there, so I always give the house to my characters to live in. So many of my characters live there. But that's just on the in Hisarmaya, looking out right next to the northernmost tower of Raveni Hisar, the castle, looking out over the Bosphorus. Yeah. So there was the people from downtown had a connection with that part of the Bosphorus on the European shore because so many of them had been to those schools. Yeah.
A collective, I would say, of Baldwin scholars are trying to trace the different places, and Ed Pavlich has done an incredible job with that. I thank him. I went over there with Turkish contacts, friends, and it was very hard to, they took me all around, and it was an incredible experience, but a lot of the addresses have changed, right, as they have elsewhere, and that's a continual.
It's also one of the places I didn't mention, was, of course, Fatih, the old city, as we called it. And so many of the photographs we saw are from those streets, which I got to know better than I wanted as a child, because they were kind of scary. You were at the same height as the car fenders, yeah. So, but it was very much, it was so much like what he photographed. Yeah, photographed the real world of Fatih. Yeah.
Something I would add is that Istanbul was going at the time, 1970, was going through a major urban transformation. Istanbul was less populated at the time, obviously, but up by where Robert College is or Bosphorus University today, Bebek was a little bit more barren. Not as urbanized.
Yeah.
Yes, but the other side, the Asians. The bridge hadn't been built. Yes, and so it was a very different Istanbul. I think it was starting to populate. I think at the time, there were a lot of Turks coming from Inner Anatolia moving to Istanbul at the time.
Yeah. I think when we moved Istanbul in 1960, it was 1 million. Population was 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it now?
16.
Well, that's
Say
also
16, but it's more.
Yeah.
If you want to see captured the sort of Baldwin era, architecturally, but in other ways, I have to recommend Maureen's novel, The Life of the Party, which is, in addition to being beautifully written, it captures the Bosphorus, it captures the scene. It's also hilarious, like laugh out loud hilarious.
I've still not been forgiven by some people. They did a tribute to my father on his 80th birthday, and that was all, so many former students and friends. But one of the women who may or may not have been in the novel, from the stage, I was sitting stupidly in the front row, and she said, "Maureen, we were thinkers, not drinkers." Both, I said.
Perhaps one last question.
Okay.
Go ahead. They asked you whether he traveled in Turkey, within Turkey. He traveled with DC.
He did.
A little bit, yeah.
He had a very odd experience, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I apologize. Erdek? Erdek. He went there with David Leeming and somebody else.
Hillary.
Yeah, and actually, it's a sad story. So I hate to end on it, but he went there, and it was this magician in this little town was hypnotizing people, and somehow he hypnotized David Leeming, who went to sleep, and ended up sort of attacking Baldwin.
Oh my God.
Luring him back to the hotel and attacking him, and it was a kind of, a wake-up call a little bit that, that Istanbul wasn't necessarily, entirely safe. Baldwin had been, before he came over, the first time he and Engin had been attacked in a bar in the West Village because Baldwin put his hand around a white woman. This was Engin's girlfriend, who was a model. And Engin ended up even worse. Engin ended up in the hospital, almost died. And Baldwin wasn't as badly injured. But it was a sort of I think it was a moment when Engin was like, maybe Istanbul's okay. Maybe I'll go back to Istanbul and play Hamlet.
So was that magician Dr. Abracadabra? Okay, so because we don't want to end on a sad note.
Yes, please.
Okay, so we were traveling in Anatolia in 1961 or whatever, and there was Dr. Abracadabra in the hotel. He did all sorts of tricks for us. And then, a year or two later, he was performing in Taksim, which was the big square in the modern part of Istanbul. And so my mother went up to say hello, and he was very, very interested in her. And so she introduced herself, and then realized it was not, he was about to attack her, which is why I asked. And so she started racing away, and he took his little magic truck and he chased her in the car all the way down Istanbul, saying, "Mrs. Freely, Mrs. Freely." so anyway, yeah.
She would say.
Dr.
Baldwin, more positively, Baldwin also went to Bodrum a few times, and when I referenced that last time when he went to the farm with Baldwin's and brother David went too, and that was one of his great memories from his
And that was when Bodrum was tiny, not
now it's like a
huge area, just like huge urban sprawl. Yeah. So those were the days. And your father has saved them for us. Donald, you mentioned that in your article about what Walker Evans' advice to get this straight. It's look at today. What's it? Look at today as if it's tomorrow's past. Look at today as if tomorrow's past, and I think he's done that for us. So I want to thank him for you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll go again. Thank you so much. Thank you.